Bert Rivera is currently a staff member at CSULB's Career and Development Center, where he brings employers to campus to hire students for internships and jobs. Outside of his work, Bert is an experienced mindfulness and meditation teacher with a desire to share these practices with others. He continues to study for the last 12 years with a highly accomplished senior meditation teacher in Long Beach and brings that training to his classes. Along with his wife, Bert has been teaching for the last 7 years, facilitating hundreds of mindfulness and meditation sessions for thousands of people in a variety of settings. He has a certificate in yoga, mindfulness, and social change from Loyola Marymount University, a certificate in compassionate integrity training from Life University, and currently teaches weekly mindfulness classes for the community. Now that's enough with introductions. Let's get into the meat of today's presentation. Thank you, Bert, so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Sinead and Kiana. Really appreciate meeting you two and being a part of this session.
We're very excited to have you, and we'll just dive right on in with our first question. What is your experience with working virtually and balancing mindfulness in a not so mindful situation like this pandemic?
Right? I think that's something we're all really interested in and really engaged in. Thank you for asking that. I know as I'm thinking about the question, I think one of the first things I probably wanted to do was define mindfulness a little bit. I think people have heard the term mindfulness in a lot of capacities. Even on TV shows, it's kind of just a the hip thing to talk about. But I think the depth of it sometimes isn't necessarily clear to people through the context it's used. And I'll be using it in a very specific context, and that's kind of what I wanted to share with before I go into kind of how I've applied it to my life today. So when I say mindfulness, communicating the act of putting your mind into something, to being present with what it is that you're doing. And it sounds simple, but I'm sure we've all had the experience, where maybe we are driving somewhere and all of a sudden we're there and we don't remember how we got there, the motions we moved through, what we saw while we were going there. Or maybe you're going up to the fridge and as you're walking, you're not necessarily present with maybe your steps or your breath. Instead, maybe you're thinking about what you're going to eat or what you're going to do after you eat. So that tendency we have to have our minds in a different place than where our bodies are, that is not being mindful. And what I define as mindfulness is bringing your mind into what you're doing. So whether it's the conversations you're having, whether it's the activities you're doing, the work that you're doing, if you put your mind into it, that's mindfulness. So I guess in that question, thinking about it, in some ways it actually was easier at the start of the pandemic to be more mindful, because I think we all had the experience of all of our habitual routines being disrupted. It's easy to just kind of have your routine and you don't really think about what you do and you just kind of have it going. You go about your day and the days can just flow by. But in the beginning of the pandemic, it was very jarring in that like everything changed, right? You couldn't just do your habitual things. It's like the habits went out the window and you really had to put your mind into everything you did. You're like, okay, I'm working from home or I'm learning from home. What does that mean? Where is my computer set up? Is, the people in the place that I'm living, are they okay with that? What's the schedule? And there's just so many different things that we don't think about that have to be thought differently. For example, I actually had an injury to my foot a couple years ago. And what really blew me away is how mindless I was from walking. I thought and I taught mindful walking, and that's actually one of the things I'm really into. So I was like, I'm really mindful. I know I'm mindful. And then when I had an injury on my foot and I really couldn't walk like I used to, it made me so much more aware of, the steps that I would take for granted, when I was going from A to B and moving around. So I think in that question, thinking about my experience, the beginning of the pandemic has made me a lot more mindful, and it showed me areas where maybe I wasn't being as aware. Aware of how I work, aware how I communicate with people, aware of the interaction with other human beings that, and what I would get from that. Because not having that, now I'm aware of what I didn't have, and I can be more mindful of that. Yeah, so that's a pretty big long-winded answer, but basically, beginning of the pandemic, more mindful, and it's been more challenging as the pandemic's gone on because now I have good routines, good habits, but to still be aware of what I'm doing, to still be present, to not take for granted that what I'm doing is what I'm doing and not think about it. So, been working on that throughout the pandemic.
In our first podcast in this series, I had brought up that same thing that would happen to me where you're driving from point A to point B, and let's say it's like from work to home, but this day you needed to go by the grocery store. and you're just like not mindful of what you're doing, and you just go straight home and you're like, wait, how did I even get
Right?
here? Did I stop at all the red lights? Like, I don't remember.
What happened?
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely one of my biggest cues that in, pre-pandemic, when I was doing that, I was like, oh wow, I'm really lacking in mindfulness and really lacking in, intention in what I'm doing. So that was something that really cued me. And I also agree that in the beginning of the pandemic, that disruption and that need to figure things out that are going to work from home made me more mindful. But as has gone on, for me at least, it's become much more difficult to separate my spaces.
Yeah.
My desk and my workplace are in my room, and I'm
Yes.
eating at my desk in my room, and like all these things.
Yeah.
So for me, as time gone deeper and deeper into this pandemic, I've noticed that I've fallen off the mindfulness train, and really just everything is bleeding into one another, like all my facets of my life. So that's
Mhm.
like personal experience
Yeah.
for me with mindfulness right now.
Yeah, and actually, you just made me think of something that I think is also important to point out. Because mindfulness, I think a lot of times people think mindfulness equals chill and relaxed, like you feel better. Mindfulness is better feeling, and if you're not feeling better, you're doing it wrong. And I think it's kind of like sometimes that can be a misperception. It's like mindfulness can lead to feeling better, right? But, it's kind of like going to the gym, right? Going to the gym can lead to maybe getting stronger. But when you're at the gym, you don't feel strong. You feel really exhausted. You feel sweaty. You don't feel good. It's kind of the opposite of what you think it would be. And it's kind of the same for mindfulness. It's like maybe when you're doing mindfulness, you're seeing what's not working, right? You're seeing how things, are blurring. You're seeing how you're doing things wrong. And it almost can make people feel like they're doing it wrong, but it's actually right because you're aware of what's happening. You can't put your mind into something until you see it. It's like being in a room with the lights turned off and you're bumping around and hitting stuff, right? And then you turn the lights on and you see how messy the room is, and it may be a shock initially, but now you can start cleaning it, and then you keep cleaning it, eventually you have a clean, neat room, and now you can work in it. And it's kind of like that, we see the things that aren't going right. We can see how our routines are not going well, and in the act of seeing it, maybe a little shocking, but now you can do something. It's when you don't see it that now just keeps going and it keeps being more problematic, and you can't really do anything about it because you don't notice it. You definitely made me think about that because there's so much that I see on a regular basis, like, ooh, I can improve on that. Ooh, I can do that. And that actually is mindfulness. You actually are doing it. You may not feel peaceful all the time, but you're aware of what's happening, and it leads to it eventually. It builds to order.
That's such a good distinction, because like you said, I think that a lot of people, when they think of mindfulness, they think of like sitting cross-legged in a dimly lit room with soothing music playing, and just trying to rewrite that narrative of what mindfulness is a starting point, I think, with buzzword of mindfulness on social media and stuff, and just kind of rewriting that narrative.
Yeah, and that's the objective of these podcasts, is to make it not like what we all think it is, meditating every day and then like practicing yoga. It can look different for everyone. But speaking about that, how can people practice mindfulness in their virtual work environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Going back to the thought of just being present with what it is that you're doing, it's not something necessarily different, but it's doing what you're doing more presently, right? So, for example, in my work day, working from home at Cal State Long Beach, I used to say I work at Cal State Long Beach. I do, but not physically. I'm at home right now at Cal State Long Beach. And I'm doing a lot of things digitally, right? So I'm interacting with people over Zoom frequently, having a lot of meetings, doing emails, projects at home, and seeing those areas where maybe you're not as present doing them, because it's easier to not be as present virtually. You can turn off your camera and then nobody sees what you're doing. So maybe you're zoning out, or you're looking at your cell phone, or maybe you get distracted and you're looking at like kitten videos instead of like answering emails and things like that. Whatever it is, it's so easy to get distracted, and you don't have the accountability of people like face to face that kind of almost hold you to focusing on what you're doing a little bit more. So what I found to be effective is to just really be present. So if I'm going into a meeting, like we're having this meeting, this session now, I come in with the intention that I want to really give my all and put my full attention on there, where I'm not going to be checking my phone. If I'm meeting with anybody, I'm not going to be distracted. I want to make as much eye contact as I can. I want to put my camera on so they can see me and I can see them. And then we can really be present and make that contact, since being virtual, it's, we're missing so much of the in-person contact. I really have to be a lot more in tune with giving as much as I can and connecting as much as I can in the limited virtual capacity that we have. If I'm doing emails, really try to focus on one thing at a time. I think a big challenge to mindfulness in the virtual workspace, but any workspace, is multitasking. I think we have a tendency to kind of just do everything and try to do everything at once. And I've done a lot of reading and research on multitasking, and we really can't multitask as human beings. We can task switch, so we can bounce back and forth between different tasks really fast. But what happens when you do that is you do the work less accurately. Actually, you make a lot more mistakes. You take longer doing it, on average, over 50% longer doing what you could do when you do each of those tasks individually. It takes longer to do them both, or if you're doing more than 2 tasks. And you actually get more stressed out and anxious. So there's a great little activity I do in some of my sessions on time management or mindfulness, where I show them the experience of single tasking versus multitasking, and that feeling of kind of anxiety, overwhelmingness that can kind of build up through the day. A lot of people aren't aware that it may not even be coming from a specific event or situation, just the act of how they're doing things. If they're doing multiple things at once, that can create a sense of just being overwhelmed. And just by doing one thing at a time and focusing at one thing at a time, that can actually reduce and alleviate a lot of that. So bringing that into the workplace, being able to focus on one thing at a time. If you're doing emails, do emails. If you're having a meeting, be present in the meeting. If you're going to answer texts, do your text. Just really delineating what you're doing. If you're studying, study. If you're listening to a lecture from a professor, listen to a lecture from a professor. Don't go onto TikTok and watch videos, because now you're not going to be really into the video, so you won't remember what happened, or you won't remember what the professor did. So you're kind of wasting both. Either just like don't go to class and do the TikTok, or go to class and focus on that, because when you try to do both, it just really reduces the effectiveness of everything, and you're actually not using your time as well. And mindfulness is about being present with what you're doing, so you can get the most out of it. You can learn, you can enjoy, you can have fun, you can engage, whatever it is, just really be there for it and give your best to it. So that's kind of like the approach I take when it comes to working virtually.
Yeah. I just want to mention how you talked about accountability and turning your camera on, because that's like really similar to my own experience. Like I have to force myself to have my camera on, because if it's off, I'll look at my phone and then I won't even realize it. 10 minutes later, like the class is over. I have gained nothing from that experience. And it's just so awful. And I'm just like, where is the time gone? And I'm kind of stuck in this limbo. Like I want the time to go by, but I'm not gaining anything from that time. And I think that's really similar to a lot of students' experiences.
And that's such a good point you bring up, because it's like, what do you want to do with your time? What's your intention, right? Like, what do you want? Do you want to learn? Okay, if you want to learn, be there, right? If you want the time to just go by, but why? Like, think
Yeah.
about, like, if time was like money, and like each minute was $1, and you get X amount of dollars a day, and if you don't spend it, it's going to get spent somewhere. Don't you want to spend it on something? Don't you want to grow in something? You're going to have to do something. Why not like do something that's going to help? Quick tangent. Me and my wife do a lot of gardening. My wife's like a head gardener in our local community center, and we do a lot of planting and gardening. And I use metaphors like that because I think it really helps. But like a seed, right? You can, if you plant a seed and you keep watering it every day, it's going to grow into something. If you water, watching TikTok videos every day, you'll be really good at watching that. If you water, being mindful, you'll get really good at that. Wherever your mindfulness is, your attention is throughout a day, it grows. There's a good saying, where your attention goes, the energy flows. So our work is kind of being directive of where do we want that energy to go, so we can grow the things we want to in our own mental gardens and in the gardens of our life. What do we want to bloom and blossom? Because something's going to grow. And speaking of, I'll just one more tangent, with the social media and technology, they're really good at taking our attention. Like, they're literally designed. They have some of the best psychologists, the best amount of, like, massive amounts of money and resources going into figuring out how they can psychologically hijack us. If you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix, it's a really good documentary that kind of gives insight into that from the people who made it. So it can be hard. You're in your class and you pull that phone up. It's not just your phone. You have all these resources taking your attention that have like worked to do that. So it's just really difficult. But that being said, you can see it as a benefit because it's almost like going to the gym and lifting heavier weights, right? You don't grow as fast if you do weaker weights, but if you do heavier weights, then you grow a lot faster, you get a lot stronger. So if you can learn to maybe just decide, I'm going to go to class and I'm only going to have 5 minutes of these videos. And maybe you don't do it all the time, but you keep coming back to it. You start getting stronger. Eventually you have the mental strength to push back against maybe the psychological hijack from technology. And now that mindfulness you can apply to anything in your life and do it really well. So it's a good training regimen.
That is just so relatable. The psychological hijacking that social media has. And I actually downloaded an app. It's called Flora, and it uses exactly the analogy that you just used. You set a timer where you're not going to pick up your phone, you're not going to check it. And you can also bid money on it. And if you complete without looking at your phone, the money goes to planting trees.
Oh, wow.
And so, so the whole premise of the app is that, to step away and you can label it like, oh, I'm checking emails for 25 minutes. Like, that's all I'm going to do. You set the timer, put your phone away, and let's say you put like $5 towards it. So after that 25 minutes has gone by, you have digitally grown a plant. Like, I've grown roses, a tree, nice. Some blueberries, like digitally you grow things, but you also can have the money get donated to planting actual real trees. So that's like a perfect analogy.
Great. That's such a cool program. Thank you for sharing that.
And then, so now that we've talked about, what mindfulness does look like through the pandemic and looking at it virtually and just really setting intentions throughout your workday and that being part of the mindfulness practice, what are some benefits to practicing mindfulness throughout the workday? I know we kind of touched on them earlier with reduction in anxiety and stuff, because the multitasking is like a real problem I have during the workday. And if I can figure out how to not do that, I'm sure I would be less anxious.
Right. I mean, all of us, and it's constant, it's a constant challenge when we have those influences. Benefits, there's so many. Oh my gosh, there's so many. And this is why I get excited about teaching mindfulness, because I think people are like, okay, you're just talking about sitting and watching your breath. What does that relate to my everyday life? But it's so relatable. There's so many effects. Right off the bat, you save time. You save a lot of time. If you're mindful and present, going to Sinead's example, and you're the last 10 minutes of class and you're not aware of it. Now, if you want to do your exam, do a quiz, do your homework, now you have to go and review what those last 10 minutes were, right? Whereas if you were present with the first 10 minutes, you got it there and now you have it and you can move on to the next thing. A lot of times when we're not mindful, we have to then recap the things we didn't get. So we save a lot of time right off the bat by just being present with what we're doing. We get more energy. There's energy that comes from being present with what you're doing. We don't have that drain of maybe feeling just like you've kind of move through the day, and at the end of the day you're like, what happened? Like, what did I do? Like what and it's just almost this like lethargy that comes from it. But instead you get energized when you're present with what you're doing, when you're accomplishing something, when you set an intention and you do it. It's motivating. It's like those small wins, and doing that builds this energy and this almost understanding in yourself that you can do whatever you set your mind to. You just have to follow through, and if you don't do it, you just improve next time. You have better relationships with people. When you're more mindful and present, you get to make connections. You really get to see the people. You really get to interact. You get to build a connection, and even virtually, it's possible. Me and my wife recently, and not to down social media. I mean, I think it's good for people who are into it, and who want to do that. We recently actually left social media, after years of being on it, and we started to reach out to friends and people that we've known over the years, and over the 2020 just start to have Zoom meetings, phone calls, and even digitally, even though we're not connected in person, we've been able to have so much better relationships because we've had better communication with people. We're listening to what they're saying, hearing their life, seeing how they're doing, responding to that, and just feel fulfilled and connected while we're still socially, physically isolated. We're not socially isolated. We've had that connection that comes through mindfulness. It improves your confidence. If once you believe and know that like you're able to handle anything, because that's what mindfulness is. It's about putting your mind into whatever situations in front of you. And our minds and brains are very powerful tools to solve problems. You ask your mind a question and it will give you some answers. Like, right now, if you take a moment, just look around your room. Just look around your space, right? Just look, just notice, see what you notice, right? Now, what I want you to do is think about everything that's the color blue. And now look at your space again and see what's the color blue, right? You're probably noticing a lot more things happening, right? See, our brains have this ability when you give it like an instruction or a directive, it filters out everything but the thing you did. It's kind of like this super advanced supercomputer that like current computers can't even touch, right? It's super powerful. So having an intention to whatever the situation is, your brain's going to do all this like computation and figure it out and start to give you solutions that are really powerful. And when you start to see that you can do that, you build confidence that it doesn't matter what challenge you go through, what situation you go through, you can do it. I mean, look, we've survived a year of pandemic. We probably would have never thought that, if somebody told you like 2 years ago that, in 2020, you're going to be home all the time, people are going to be socially isolated, there's a global pandemic, you'd be like, what? Like you probably just have anxiety hearing that. But just the confidence of knowing we survived it and we've moved through this challenge, then you can move through other challenges. And that's really confidence building. Also, you filter out unnecessary information. One of the challenges in our society today is we're in information overload. I remember reading a statistic that they said the amount of information we get in one day is more than I think somebody like 100 years ago would receive in like a week.
I believe it.
Just all the information we take. So that can be hard trying to then filter that because, I think of like different cultures and societies where our work was maybe a lot more focused on um, maybe agriculture or just doing basic tasks to survive, very physical. It's very easy to see the beginning and ending of a task. In our society today, with school, with work, it's very information driven. So we're just bombarded with reams of information, whether it's the things you're studying, the emails you're getting, the work you're doing, and it's not clear all the time. It's not clear what's important, what's not. How do you prioritize what's not? Mindfulness gives you the ability to see clearer on that and to cut out the unnecessary information, just like your brain does that when you look around and there's things you don't notice, but you're looking at the color blue, only that pops out a lot more at you. When you're more mindful, you get to cut out the things that aren't necessary to your intention, so then you can really be laser focused and get done with what you want to get done. And that results in being able to get things done quicker, to make better choices, to make more informed choices. I mean, wouldn't you like that? Like, wouldn't anybody like that, to like
Yeah.
get things done faster, to be more present, to feel more balanced and calm, to have more time, more energy, better relationships? It's like everything you could want in life. And literally sitting down and watching your breath leads into that, or sitting down and watching what you're eating, or sitting down or walking and being aware of your steps. It seems little, but what we're doing is you're training your mind. You're training your mind how to be present. And that mind training goes with you everywhere because you take your mind everywhere with you. And it's I love it. It's kind of the ultimate life hack. If you want to hack your life, hack your mind, get into being mindful. And now everything you do will have that mindfulness touch to it. And then that just improves every aspect of your life.
Yeah, there are a couple things that you just went over that really stand out to me personally. One is definitely social media. I mean, a lot of what I do with my job at Project Ocean and starting a mental health advocacy page. I like to spend time on social media, but what I have noticed is when I spend time on my personal social media, you're right. You're just constantly updated on little beautiful portions of people's lives. So why would I take time out of my day to reach out to friends and family that I normally don't see when I'm just seeing them on social media all the time? So taking a break from social media like at least your personal account, I can see that being incredibly beneficial with connecting with people and being more mindful in your interactions and overall connectedness.
It surprised me and my wife. Oh my God. I mean, I had Facebook since Facebook came out back when I was in college, and I thought, I was kind of stepping back from it and being mindful, but literally not doing it and not getting those updates and then having real conversations. You don't just see the beautiful moments, you see the challenges, you see the struggles, you see the support you can give. You get support from others, you get insight that you wouldn't have gotten before. You have deeper relationships, and it's so much there's so much that we just miss, and we're not even aware of it. Like, that's why me and my wife were surprised, because we were like, whoa, wow, we thought we were connected, but we didn't have any idea like that we weren't really connected to this degree, and you get so much fulfillment from it. So yeah, I so agree with you. That's such a big deal.
Normally I'll take breaks from social media. Like
Yeah.
like one habit that I'm trying to really make stick is that if I'm not using Instagram or TikTok, I'm deleting the app off of my phone. Like it doesn't exist on my phone until I go, oh, I need to check that page. Let me re-download it, sign in. Just like creating those additional barriers to getting
Yeah.
that quick dopamine fix,
Right.
like anything I can do to build that barrier is for sure. It's pretty nice to have that break. Another area that I really like that you spoke on was confidence building. I have personally noticed that throughout this pandemic and lacking the mindfulness and intention in work and really doing all those multitasking and having like 5 different to-do lists in front of me and not setting intention and time blocking, I have noticed my academic confidence kind of dwindle. I'm in my last semester as a master's student and I'm doing research for my capstone, and just the grandiose of like having to write an academic chapter can be really intimidating, and having all these other steps leading up to actually sitting down and writing it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking if I just sat down and was like, you know what, today I'm spending an hour, I'm going to read these 3 research articles, I'm going to notate them. That's one task, and chunking it into those smaller tasks and really setting that intention to like, that is the only thing I am going to be doing. I can definitely see how that would make me feel like, oh, give me another 3 articles. Let's do it again. I know I can do it. So building confidence is something I'm really interested in with mindfulness.
Oh, that's great. That's such a great point. And chunking is a great way to handle big, challenging problems. It's like one little bite at a time. We don't really eat elephants. So that line where they say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So I don't want to use that example, but you take little steps, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So you just take one step. And as long as you're making little steps, that's a huge difference. Yeah, that's a great practice.
Not to backtrack or anything, but something I also want to mention, when Kiana mentioned deleting your social media apps so you have like barriers before going onto it, something I certainly noticed, because I love to delete my social media apps all the time, and I am constantly challenging myself not to go on it because I am an addict. But what I notice is when I delete it, I will mindlessly go to where that app was, and I'll have it hidden in a pocket, and I'll be sitting in the car and I'll have that pocket open and I'll be clicking, but there's no app there. And so
right?
that's scary.
Right? And it's not, and it's, we think, it's us, but it's not us. It's literally the technology that they've designed to do that. 2 quotes from The Social Dilemma that really stood out to me and really kind of were like shocking, but I was like, oh, that's real. One was that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yeah.
So with social media, we're not paying for it. We're the product. We're sold to advertisers. Our attention, our behavior, our ability to then keep clicking things, that is the product. That is the design intention for their success. It isn't problem with us. It's intentional behavior modification that's then sold as a product, because then now we can be better consumers. So that's one. And then another one that quote that stood out was that there's only 2 industries that call their customers users: the illicit drug industry and the tech industry. So
oh my goodness,
both of those, when I heard those, I was like, ooh. And yeah, those behaviors, I've seen it in myself, where I would just open the phone and scroll to Facebook, and
Yeah.
and just mindlessly go there. And I was like, and I'm aware enough to be like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why is my body just taking over and doing this? And again, it goes back to that psychological hijack that kind of overrides our conscious mind and then goes into other parts of our mind to make us do things. So yeah, when I started to get into reading about that, I was like, oh no, I can't do this. I can't be a mindfulness teacher and try to get my mind together and then being hijacked by these apps. And again, they can be good in moderation if you use it, but for me, I kind of reached a point where I was like, yeah, I'm done with moderation. I want to just be done with it and see what that experience is like. And it's been really insightful and exciting. I've gotten more time, more energy, better relationships, and having that as a contrast has been very motivating to stay in that direction.
Just saying, for those that are listening, my jaw was literally on the floor with those quotes because they're so painfully true. Wow, that was, whew,
I know. I love the social dilemma. I would recommend it 100%. It just supports everything we're talking about how they hijack your brain. And something I do to kind of like, I try to do if I am on social media, if they get me, I try and ask myself, like, if I wasn't on TikTok for the past 30 minutes, like, what would I have done? Like, would I
Right.
have actually studied for that midterm? Would I have cleaned my room? Like,
Right.
I don't know, there's so much time in the day, but I act like there's not because I waste so much time of it just mindlessly going through TikTok. TikTok is by far my worst one.
Right. I mean, and it's so like the clips and they're so easy and fast to watch. Going back to the garden metaphor, it's like, if you're growing those plants, now what other plants could you be growing? Maybe you're growing plants that you can't eat or that aren't enjoyable, right? You're growing like the TikTok plant, right? Maybe it gives you quick something, but maybe you want to grow like other food plants. I know because me and my wife are all into like growing our different food crops, and we're trying to experiment with that. Like, it's valuable space. Our mind and our time, those are valuable resources. So what do you want to grow? What are areas in your life where you're like, I want to be better at this, or I want to have better relationships, or I'm not good enough in this. Okay, if you see that, now invest that time and energy. And sometimes social media got to go. Like you can't be growing that if you want to grow something else. And you'll be surprised how much energy and time you get back. And you're like, wow, I can read things and learn things and be smarter and be happier. It's very exciting. So
tagline of this episode: sometimes social media gots to go.